Welcome everyone to the first of my two-part series about Spider-Man 1967's The Lizard, aka The Lizard Man. In this video, I'll be comparing Liz's first appearance in the cartoon with his first appearance in the comic. And in the second part, which should be out in a few days by the way, I'll compare Grant Ray Lawrence's Season 1 Lizard episode with Ralph Bakshi's Season 3 Lizard episode. Neat! And everyone remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz if you enjoy this video. Or if you hate it, whatever works. Also, I have a Patreon, so if you really like this video and want to support the channel to see more, there's that. Alright, so without further ado, let's talk about Lizard's first appearance from Spider-Man 1967 in Where Crawls the Lizard, while comparing it to his first comic book appearance in Face to Face with the Lizard, from issue number 6 of The Amazing Spider-Man. Where Crawls the Lizard first aired on September 16th, 1967, as the second episode of the 1967 animated series. This was about 4 years after the Lizard's first appearance in the comics on August 8th, 1963 in Amazing Spider-Man number 6. The episode starts off with that nice Spidey 67 jazz as it scrolls along this swampland here until we see a boat with two fishermen in it. But then, a scaly green monster jumps up alongside the boat, demanding they get out of his kingdom. Fisherman 1 responds,
"What is it? A lizard or a man?"
To which the monster replies,
"I'm a lizard man, and the swamps belong to me."
Yeah, in Spider-Man 1967, he isn't the Lizard, by the way. He is the Lizard Man, for some reason. Maybe licensing stuff, I don't know. Also, Dr. Kurt Connors is Curtis Connor, along with Mrs. Connor and Billy Connor, not Connors, for whatever reason. The Lizard Man then flips the boat and declares,
"Today I rule the swamps, tomorrow the world,"
as the fishermen swim away for their lives. The Lizard Man growls and descends back into the murky, swampy darkness. Then, title card. Alright, now let's switch to Amazing Spider-Man number 6, Face to Face with the Lizard. Alright, first we get this wonderful title page, also known as a splash page, I found out recently. Here with a bit of a preview of the action that is to come. Okay, next page we see the Lizard attacking some people while telling them to get out of his swamp. I can make a Shrek joke here, I'm not going to. It's pretty similar, except now they appear to be hunters instead of fishermen. And he refers to himself as the Lizard instead of a Lizard Man. And instead of showing his strength by flipping a boat, he instead deflects their bullets with his scaly reptilian skin, and then picks up a huge tree and snaps it as if it were cardboard. He snapped that huge tree as if it were cardboard. Run! We've got to get away from here.
Flee, puny humans. This swamp is mine. Here the lizard reigns supreme.
Boy, he doesn't have to tell me twice. Like wildfire, the reports of the human lizard spread throughout the Everglades, the state, and the entire nation. Okay, back to the show. We see a newsboy shouting the headline from the newspaper he's holding. A lizard man terrorizes Florida Everglades. And that guy on the right kind of looks like he's more bored than he is terrorized, right? But I mean, you don't know. Everyone handles terror in their own way, I suppose. Also, he lives in Florida, so probably just another Tuesday for him, right? Seeing a lizard man. Anyway, the camera pans up and we see our hero Spider-Man. He says to himself, "Lizard Man, boy, would I like to tackle a character like that." But he realizes he can't because he's broke and doesn't have any money to get to Florida. But Spidey suddenly got a wonderful idea. Get Jameson to pay for it. He'll cough up the money for a good scoop like this. Then we get a few of those wonderful reused swinging animations, and it transitions to an angry, screaming Jameson. He wants to know why Peter Parker thinks a kid like him would be able to get close to the Lizard Man, which honestly is a pretty good question since he doesn't know that he's Spider-Man, right? The red-haired Betty Brant, because she doesn't normally have red hair, tries to put 2 cents in about how Peter might be able to get pictures and is quickly shut down. But Peter eventually convinces Jameson by playing to his ego and his love of money, saying that the Daily Bugle circulation will go through the roof with papers that have headlines that read, "J. Jonah Jameson, fearless publisher of the Daily Bugle, scoops nation with the first photographs of the notorious Lizard Man." and then transitions to a flying plane in the sky, and then via that transition he shows up in a hotel in the Florida Everglades. But first, back to the comic. Similar to the show, we see a newsboy with a newspaper that, has something to do with the lizard, and Spidey thinks to himself, I'd like a paper too, but I'll get it my own way. So he steals it. Paying? No, I'll get it my own way. He sees that the Bugle has issued a challenge to Spidey to defeat the lizard, and Spidey is not amused. He decides to go see Jameson as Peter Parker and see if he'll send him down to Florida to get some lizard pics. But once he gets to the Daily Bugle, Jameson tells Peter that he only printed that headline to sell papers, and that the lizard was probably a fake, and even if it wasn't a fake, Spider-Man wouldn't waste his time going down to Florida when he's too busy building his rep by taking out 2-bit hoods there in New York. Peter thinks to himself, yeah, I guess I should have seen that coming, and leaves. As he leaves, a brown-haired Betty Brant tells Peter that Jameson should have sent him to get a scoop, a similar sentiment to which he shows in the cartoon.
But Mr. Jameson, suppose Peter did get pictures of the Lizard Man.
Peter Parker? Fat chance.
Okay, then there's this whole part that's not in the show at all, but let's just go over it a bit anyway. Peter goes to the Natural History Museum where he sees Flash Thompson and Liz Allen, both characters who aren't in the show. Flash is a jerk to Peter and calls him a bookworm, classic Flash, and Liz tells him to shut up. Then Peter notices some bad guys trying to steal the Idol's ruby, so Peter sneaks off and changes into a Spider-Man outfit. While he's gone, the bad guys take Liz as a hostage after a guard tries to stop them. Spider-Man then drops into the scene, makes a little joke in typical Spider-Man fashion, then proceeds to beat them up and apprehend the criminals. Spidey then hurriedly web swings away, worried that somebody might notice that Peter Parker is missing.
Liz, come on, snap out of it. This is Flash. Don't you remember me?
Flash? Flash who? All I can remember are Spider-Man's strong arms around me.
Spidey has absolutely wooed Liz Allen with his coolness, and Flash is very insecure about having Spider-Man as a romantic rival, and of course Peter is like, yeah, you should be worried, bro, duh. At that moment, a boy passes by, listening to the news on his transistor portable radio.
The nation wonders why Spider-Man has avoided going after the lizard.
That settles it. I've got to find a way to get Jameson to send me to Florida.
And what better way to convince Jameson than by terrorizing him as Spider-Man? First we see him shining his spider signal through Jameson's window at the Daily Bugle, which is something he used a lot more back then. Jameson is of course terrified. Spider-Man tells him that he's decided to accept the Bugle's challenge to take on the lizard and that he better send a photographer if he wants the scoop. Spider-Man then swings away out the window, convinced that he's persuaded Jameson to send him to Florida, while also thinking about how ridiculous it was that he's a superhero that can't even afford to meet up with his own villains. So then Jameson of course calls Betty Brant and tells her to get Peter Parker and to also get some cushions to cushion his fall from the web. But she isn't fast enough and the web snaps and he angrily swears in comic book. Then, exactly 5 minutes later, Peter shows up at the Daily Bugle and Jameson tells him that they're both going to Florida. An unwelcome surprise to Peter, but he knows it's the best deal he's probably going to get, so he goes along with it. Peter then goes and tells Aunt May about his trip to Florida, which she adamantly is against until she finds out that good old Jonah will be there to protect him.
He's like a big fat guardian angel, Aunt May.
So the next day, Peter meets Jameson at the airport with a bunch of newspaper clippings about lizard sightings. And then in the next panel, they're on the plane while Peter scans the newspapers. And Peter notices that the reptile expert, Kurt Connors, lives in the area and figures that it might be a good place to start. And then in the next panel, they're at the airport in Florida. Peter tells Jonah that he's got to run and get some new film while Jonah gets their hotel settled. Jonah agrees, but is annoyed that Peter didn't already do that in New York. But of course, if he did that in New York, he wouldn't have had the excuse to go change into Spider-Man. Okay, so the start was a little different in the cartoon and the comic, but now both comic and cartoon Spidey are in Florida, okay? Alright, so now we're gonna go back to the cartoon. We see Peter in his hotel room changing into his costume via this great animation that's reused a bunch in the series. And then he's out running through the Florida woods, lizard man hunting. He eventually comes across a sign that says Dr. Curtis Connor, Reptile Research Laboratory with a big arrow. Spidey says to himself, oh, okay, well, that seems like a good place to start. Let's get advice from the authority on reptiles who just so happens to be out here. Nice. He comes across some big lizard man footprints and compares their shoe size like absolutely anyone else would in that situation. But before tracking the lizard man via his giant footprints, he decides to talk to Dr. Connor first. But then we see the lizard man come out from behind a tree, menacingly, and he has a different plan. And then we get this lizard man to Spider-Man transition here. A total of like 30 seconds has probably passed, but now Spider-Man is standing there and suddenly his spider sense starts going crazy. And then, oh no, it's him! Ah! The dreadful lizard man pulls poor Spidey into the murky depths of the swamp. Spidey pops him in the face, and then after avoiding being strangled, he maneuvers the lizard man into the ground and then jumps off his butt like he's Bugs Bunny or something. Very cartoony. So then the exhausted Spidey webs himself out of the swamp and decides that he'd like Dr. Connor's advice before he fights that thing again. But then we see the lizard man once again menacingly come out from behind a tree, and he has a different plan. It then transitions to young Billy Connor, and Spidey jumps onto the scene. Billy immediately recognizes the hero and introduces himself. He then goes on to tell Spidey that his dad, the reptile expert, Dr. Connor, is missing, and that his mom has been really upset about it and crying about it all week. And with this, Spider-Man decides to talk to his mom. But first, let's go back to the comic. So, our hero Spider-Man, after having just given Jonah the slip, is on the hunt for the lizard. He gets to the area where the lizard has been spotted and has to sneak past the cops patrolling in the area. And then we see the lizard coming out from behind a tree, menacingly, and he's ready to fight. Then, like in the comic, as his spider sense starts going off while he's standing next to the swamp, the lizard pulls him into the dark depths of the swamp. He throws a glob of mud into the lizard's face and is able to get out of the swamp. Spidey and Lizard have a little showdown.
The swampland is mine. I have warned the world, but you dared to invade my domain, and so you are doomed.
Sure. Every time I turn around, I get doomed by someone else. He's fast. His tail almost got by me that time. Strange, he doesn't seem to be wearing a disguise. That grotesque form is really him. So then while they're fighting, Spider-Man realizes the lizard is 1, not wearing a costume, like a Scooby-Doo villain or something, and 2, is very strong. He flings Spidey about half a mile away through the trees. And then while he's up in the trees, this is when Spidey sees Dr. Connor's house in the distance and decides to go warn him how near the lizard is. When Spidey gets to the house, he sees a woman inside is crying. Okay, and back to the cartoon. Spider-Man is telling young Billy Connor that he's going to talk to his mom and do whatever he can to help find his dad. It then transitions to Mrs. Connor telling Spider-Man about the disappearance of her husband, saying that she woke up one morning and found a note.
A terrible thing has happened, and I'm afraid to remain. Take Billy and leave this place and never come back.
Spidey agrees with the letter, saying that it's too dangerous for them to be there with a dangerous lizard man on the loose. But just then they hear Billy cry out, which sounded like this. One more time. That's how Billy sounded when he cried. Anyway, Spider-Man looks out the window to see the commotion, and oh god, it's the lizard man, and he's after the child. Oh god. Save him, Spider-Man. The lizard's humanity is kind of popping through a little bit right now as he's trying to tell his son that he won't hurt him. But obviously Billy doesn't recognize this as his dad, and he is pretty freaked out. So then Spider-Man swoops in, grabs him, puts him safely up in a tree. We then see Spider-Man being dragged and dropped from off-screen to on-screen up in this tree, right? Spidey swings down to give him a flying kick but fumbles it. Lizard Man then does the same drag and drop animation he did before as he closes in on the downed Spider-Man. But before he gets the chance to attack, Billy's mom calls out for him, which makes the lizard man back off and retreat. Again, kind of showing his humanity, right? He hurt his wife and he was like, oh. But then once Billy's mom arrives on the scene, Billy and Spidey are both curious as to why the lizard man would run away at the sound of her voice, because they hadn't put it together yet, right? Spider-Man asks Mrs. Connor what the good doctor was working on before he disappeared, to which she answers, a serum for swamp fever. And fun fact, real quick, not only does swamp fever have nothing to do with reptiles, it's a horse disease, actually. So Alright, well, moving on. Spidey tells them to go back to the house while he checks out Dr. Connor's lab. Once there, Spider-Man is shocked by Dr. Connor's impressive lab setup, because he's a giant nerd and loves science and everything. Spider-Man sees a beaker full of bubbling green liquid and says, "This looks like something special." He then uses his science student skills to further examine it and find out that it's actually Capsium reptilis. I was right! This explains the map, Spider-Man says aloud to himself before walking over to this map that he says has all of Earth's swamps circled on it. Then Spidey says, "I've got to work fast. For every formula, there's an antidote." And a terrible lizard man shows up right as he completes it. Spider-Man exclaims, "Lizard Man!" To which a lizard man responds,
That's right. Soon all mankind will tremble at my name. With that serum, I will create a reptile army that will take over the world.
The lizard man tail whips the serum from Spider-Man's hand and catches it. He then throws what appears to be a grenade of some kind. Mrs. Connor is suddenly there, looking for Spider-Man who survived the blast, but the lizard man is already long gone. Mrs. Connor asks if he's alright and responds by saying all that's hurt is his pride, after now losing to the lizard man twice. He goes on to say it's time for round 3, and this time, he's gonna give him a taste of his cure for lizard men. It transitions to Spider-Man with Mrs. Connor and Billy by the swamp. He explains again that he's going to stop the lizard man from creating a savage reptile army by using the lizard antidote he whipped up in the lab. Then he kind of hovercrafts away using webs as a propeller with one hand and then webs under both feet to keep him afloat somehow. Spider-Man eventually comes across an old Spanish fort and he has a hunch that's where the lizard man is hiding. And in case you don't know, they do have a few old Spanish forts in Florida, so I guess one being out in the middle of the swamp isn't too crazy? Alright, well anyway, back to the comic. Spider-Man has just finished fighting the lizard man and has come to warn Dr. Connors, but instead finds his crying wife. "I wanted to talk to your husband, ask his advice about reptiles, but there's no time now. You've got to leave. The lizard is nearby."
Leave? Oh no, you don't understand. My husband, Dr. Curtis Connors, is the lizard. What?
Mrs. Connor goes on to explain how her husband was a surgeon who lost his arm in the war, and ever since, he's studied reptiles, hoping that he could one day learn to replicate their amazing ability to regrow lost limbs. Then, after months of experimentation, Dr. Connors makes a serum that successfully grows back the foot of a rabbit. So, like any super scientist, he then decides to use himself as the first human subject. And at first, it goes great. His arm comes back and he's overjoyed. But the serum hadn't finished taking effect. So quick recap real fast, in the comic Dr. Connors made the lizard serum in order to try and replicate the reptilian ability to grow back lost limbs, and in the cartoon it was to try and cure swamp fever, which again is a horse disease. Why the change? I'm not sure. My guess is that maybe a war vet with a missing limb was a little too brutal for children's television. Alright, so then Mrs. Connor goes on to explain how her husband came back to make an antidote, but his new dumb lizard brain wouldn't allow him to science like before. So he writes a note telling her to take Billy and leave, just like the cartoon. And as she's finishing her sad story, little Billy Connor screams from outside. Spider-Man jumps into action as we see the lizard trying to talk to his son.
I won't hurt you.
Suddenly, a colorful, fast-moving figure swings down from above. So then, they duke it out a bit. Spidey's punches do little against the lizard's scaly, protective exterior. Ow, his skin is as hard as dinosaur's armor. I almost broke my hand and he hardly felt it. I'll try to hold him with my web until... No, that's no good either. He snapped it with his tail as if it were made of paper. Just then, a female voice cries out and it strikes a hidden chord deep within the lizard's breast.
Billy, where are you? Billy!
Slowly he turns and then silently slithers into the murky swamp. Spider-Man tells Mrs. Connors that he has seen her husband, but he grows less human by the minute. Similar to the cartoon, young Billy knows who Spider-Man is, saying that he's seen pictures of him. Spider-Man asks Mrs. Connor to take him to her husband's notes and laboratory so he can get to work on a lizard antidote. It's a good thing I'm a science major in high school, so the kids make fun of me and call me a bookworm, do they? Well, this bookworm is gonna find an antidote for the lizard. Gosh, are you a scientist too, Spider-Man? Hours later, it's like He asks this question, and then hours later he responds. I don't know if they meant that. That might have been a mistake. We'll soon find out if I'm a scientist or not. I'll drop a pellet of the compound I created into this test tube. He succeeds in making the antidote, which he knows works because it turned green, obviously. That's science 101, guys. But how the heck is he gonna get the lizard to drink it? Spidey wonders to himself. And then just a moment later, the lizard returns.
Lizard Man!
That's right.
You are the only one who does not fear me. Once I destroy you, all mankind will tremble before the lizard.
Spidey hands the anti-lizard formula to Mrs. Connors in a hurry and tries to reason with the lizard, which results in him getting a big desk thrown at him. The lizard thinks the desk finished Spidey off, so he leaves, shouting about how he's gonna build a mighty lizard army by giving his lizard serum to other reptiles like crocodiles and alligators. But of course, Spider-Man isn't actually dead, and Mrs. Connor helps him out of the big pile of splintered wood. She tells Spider-Man of her husband's plans of a mighty lizard army and hands him the lizard antidote, asking him how he's gonna get the lizard to swallow it. Spider-Man tells her he'll worry about that when the time comes, and that she and little Billy need to go somewhere safe. Then suddenly, they're outside. They were just in Dr. Connor's lab. The conversation continues as if they were just standing there in his lab, but suddenly they're outside. Right? Anyway, I just thought that was a funny thing to point out. And the cartoon actually fixed this with a normal transition that doesn't take place mid-conversation. Anyway, moving on. Similar to the cartoon, Spider-Man puts webs under both of his feet to float down the river, but instead of making a web propeller, he makes a web oar. Perhaps animating a propeller in motion is easier to make look good than having Spidey row down the river. I don't know. Who knows? Anyway, he floats down the river, deals with a snake, and then comes across an old Spanish fort. Okay, back to the cartoon where Spidey has just arrived at the Floridian Spanish fort. And there he is, the dreadful Lizard Man and his two alligator companions. Not knowing that Spider-Man is there, the Lizard Man tells his scaly pets his evil plan to pour the lizard serum into the swamps. Then mankind will be at his mercy, or so he thinks. Meanwhile, Spider-Man, with his mind on the money and the money on his mind, snaps some pictures of the reptilian atrocity for Jameson at the Bugle. Afterwards, he's ready to fight, but whoopsie-daisy, Spider-Man trips and falls, and after seemingly forgetting that he has webs, he crashes to the ground. So then the Lizard Man sixes alligators on Spidey and runs away. Spider-Man is on hot pursuit, crawling up the Spanish fort's tower, and when Spidey finally gets through the window, the Lizard Man is gone. Psych! He was on the ceiling and he jumps down on Spider-Man while it plays this wonderfully cartoony falling sound effect. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great? I love that. Then the final battle begins. The horrible Lizard Man jumps on our hero and tries to strangle him to death, but Spidey thinks fast and hits him with a face full of web, which we are going to slow down here. And this was just Grant Ray Lawrence trying to make him have a completely web-covered head. But it's green, so it looks more like a cactus or something, right? Like really they should have just made it white. I don't know why they didn't make it white. Maybe they meant to, I don't know. But anyway, so we see him desperately trying to get this web off of his head. But before he can do anything, Spidey hits him with another web from across the room, binding him. He comes over and says,
Now that you're in a position to listen to reason, take your medicine like a good lizard.
And then pours it into his mouth, into his reptilian mouth, and then pours it into his lizardy mouth. We then get this cool scene of him going all spiral-eyed and crazy while he slowly transforms back into Dr. Connor. And the webs just sort of come off of him for some reason. I don't know, just notice that. And then he asks Spider-Man what happened, and Spider-Man tells it to him like it is.
What happened?
You tested your swamp fever serum on yourself and became a giant lizard. But the nightmare is over now, Dr. Connor.
It then transitions to the Connor family. They all express their gratitude, and cartoon Spider-Man leaves Florida the same way he came, via a very quick sequence of an airplane flying in the sky. We then see Peter getting chewed out by Jameson because he didn't get any pictures of Spider-Man, and that apparently the pictures of Lizard Man are worthless because they just so happen to be shooting a Lizard Man movie down there at the same time, and that's probably what it was. Peter gives a cool wink to the camera and is like, yeah, just my luck, I guess. And that's the end, as it plays the Spidey end swing sequence with that cool jazz. Now let's finish the comic. Spidey is at the Floridian Spanish fort taking pictures of the lizard, aka Curtis Connors. He has 4 alligators instead of the 2 that he had in the cartoon, which was probably to save money, I'm guessing. Hey, less alligators, less money, right? Mo alligators, mo problems. Anyway, he gives his alligators a similar speech to the cartoon about taking over the world by spilling his serum into the murky waters of the Florida Everglades. But then whoopsie daisy, Spider-Man falls and forgets he has webs, like in the cartoon, but he lands a little more gracefully. The lizard sicks his alligators on Spidey and runs up the tower. Spider-Man gets away from them and chases the lizard to the top of the tower. He realizes he's trapped. Then, the alligators start using their super-powered tails to hit the wall, threatening to bring it down. Spidey swings away into the window of one of the towers, and the lizard follows. Spidey locks the door to keep out the alligators, and then the final battle begins. As Spider-Man plunges toward the floor below, grasping his life-saving strand of web in one hand, he lunges out skillfully. Then, in midair, the amazing costume crusader summons all of his speed, his unerring skill, his lightning-fast reflexes, and whisks a small vial from his belt. "Hold it, Liz, this will only take a second." And after a bit of time, Kurt Connors transforms back into his human self, and shortly after, has a tearful reunion with his wife. They all have a talk where Spider-Man suggests they keep this whole thing hush-hush since he didn't do anything too illegal. I mean, he did attack those hunters at the beginning, but they're fine, so whatever, you know. Peter Parker then goes to meet his very angry boss, who's been wondering where he's been. He shows him the pictures of the lizard in an attempt to cool him down.
The lizard? How did you get these pictures?
I bought them from an old Indian guide I met at the edge of the Everglades.
Well, you wasted your money. Can't you even tell a fake photo when you see one? You fool, there is no lizard. The whole thing must have been some sort of publicity stunt. But where is Spider-Man? Why didn't you get some pictures of him?
Classic Jameson, right? So yeah, they go back to New York and Peter doesn't even get paid. We then get to see some more personal Peter Parker stuff, which unfortunately the cartoon didn't have nearly as much of, especially Grant Ray Lawrence's season 1. So yeah, then we see Peter's chilling at home. Aunt May is telling him he needs to do some chores and that his Florida vacation is over. Peter thinks, Betty Brant is busy working tonight, so I'll call Liz and see if she wants to go on a date, which kind of seems lame, but I guess he wasn't really dating anyone at that point, so it's, you know. But Liz doesn't want to hang out with him or even be on the phone with him because she's waiting on a call from Spider-Man. You know, clearly she's still very deeply in love after that museum heist earlier. Peter is like, dang it, I have such rotten luck. And then it switches to the Bugle, where we see Jameson has received a letter from Spider-Man, that wacky, mischievous Spider-Man. Betty Brant reads it aloud.
It says, "Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm still at large, so phooey to you."
Well, don't just stand there. Tear it up. Burn it. Oh, I'll get that masked menace if it's the last thing I do.
Yes, you know, like, because of course Jameson is infuriated by that, and that's the end of the comic. Okay, so that is all for part 1. But fear not, webheads, our reptilian journey isn't over yet because part 2 will be out soon. And it'll be comparing the episode I just went over with Bakshi's season 3 episode that is almost entirely made up with material from the season 1 episode, with some interesting changes here and there that I'll make sure to go over. So be sure to watch out for that. But until then, have a good night and thanks for watching.